the bank.
Hey Brett, how's it going this week?
Good, Ange. How are you?
Good. Well, that means it's another episode of Money in the Bank, the podcast where we talk about all things related to personal finance. And we start off with our listeners' very favorite thing, which is a trivia question for Brett.
Skipping the trivia question is our listener's favorite thing.
No. In fact, every listener that participated in our 100-episode giveaway challenge actually said that the trivia was their favorite thing. So you have to keep doing them.
Yeah, they just wished I'd get a little more of them right every once in a while.
That's true. So what percentage of Americans are not saving anything for retirement?
30%.
15%.
Come on.
So, and of course, this is working class or working age Americans. So we're not talking about the elderly that are in retirement or children that are,
Yeah, there you go, qualifying the question again after I answer it.
Yeah, so I guess if we include all those, but then that would be like closer to 50%. So I don't know. You're still wrong.
Right.
So anyways, I kind of wanted to take a step back today and just talk about why aren't people saving for retirement? Obviously, we're not going to get into like a discussion of like wages or jobs or any of that. We want to focus more on the individual and the psychology behind it, because in terms of saving money, there's obviously a lot of circumstances outside of your control as so far as the wage that you get paid and the economics of the country you live in, right? But typically in America, that stuff is set up well enough. Our economy's actually been doing really well for a lot of years now. And most of us should be able to save something for retirement. So
then it comes down to a choice, right, of like, or a mentality of like, I should do something else with this money that could be going into some form of the savings.
Yeah,
right?
and I will say, like, we are marketed to from basically when we come out of the womb until we die.
Oh, I mean, yeah, targeted kids advertising. I mean, we're in the consumerist society, so producing things and consuming things is our bread and butter, right?
And in fact, like, you know that old adage of, like, they don't make it like they used to. I actually listened to a podcast recently, and, like, that is completely true, where they actually had a meeting, like, an old light bulb company years ago was like, our light bulbs are lasting too long. We need to make them burn out faster so that people buy more. And, like, there's this light bulb that's been like burning for 100 years, and they like won't even turn it off because they're like, if we turn it off, it might never turn back on. But like that, that's even something Brett and I did when we bought our first house. We switched to Cree light bulbs, which are like LEDs. They last a lot longer, and like we've moved them from house to house to house to house with us now.
Right. Yeah, we got them. Yeah, a long time ago.
Yeah.
5-6 years ago, and yeah, we all of our lamps, all the ceiling lighting in our house, like we just keep swapping the bulbs out. Because I mean, they weren't inexpensive to buy at that time anyway, because they were like, I don't know, $8 to $10 a bulb.
Yeah.
Like $7 on sale, something like that. But they don't use any energy, and they don't expire. So. Right,
but I mean, just watch out, because I bet in a few years they're gonna make like the same type of LEDs that are like, these don't use any energy, but they're gonna like, burn out in 4 months like they're supposed to, so that you can buy some more. And I think that's like everything that that's just the society we live in. Like, we have throwaway clothing, throwaway makeup, throwaway, light bulbs, down to furniture. People replace it a lot more. And I've even noticed, Brett, like a huge trend in basically your home, where like if a house is like 10 years, or a kitchen is 10 years old, people will be like, I can't live here with these cabinets. And I'm like, cabinets are not something you should replace every 10 years.
Right. Some style agency somewhere like creates a big trend, and then that proliferates through like Home and Garden TV and like all the news shows, and they start implementing that in like the latest like home builds. So then newer houses have like these things, which means that like fancier houses have these things, right? And so yeah, it used to be granite countertops, now it's different kind of countertops. Now the flooring's all different, the color of flooring is different, it's the reclaimed wood movement, right? It used to be oak, light oak cabinets, now it's like dark maple cabinets,
or white shaker
cabinets, right? Yeah, the big trend as well.
Yeah, so it's just kind of crazy, because what all of that is doing, like if you're renovating your kitchen every 10 years or your bathroom every 10 years, those are like the most expensive areas of your house to renovate. You can easily drop $50,000.
Right, and to be on the latest trend, right, all of those things are 5 times the price of other things you could replace that with.
So, I mean, really what it's doing is creating this society where we just spiral and we spend more and more and more. But what I wanted to do today is take a step back and talk about, so if it's so easy to encourage people to spend more and stay up with the latest and greatest, why is it so hard to get people to talk about their finances?
Right. And it's a difference too between like whatever is changing your mindset to be like this is functional or usable, practical, versus whatever is making my emotion determine what nice is defined as.
Right.
Right? So how, if my kitchen is no longer nice, but it works the same way that it used to, right? Something changes in my personal behavior. It's not about the kitchen didn't change, right? It still works the same way, unless the drawers fell apart.
Unless something physically breaks.
Right. Yeah. So how do I retrain my brain to like realize that that's okay? And how did I get in that place in the first place?
Yeah, and it's interesting because even like as far as kitchens go, I was actually reading something recently about how like a galley kitchen is designed to maximize efficiency in the kitchen essentially, and everybody wants like the big open like island because that's what we see on HGTV. Mm-hmm. So it's really interesting, but yeah. So and I think to kind of peel this back, sometimes people have asked or alluded to like how are you so good with money, and I've openly admitted like I grew up with a financial planner, but I also feel like something that works really well for me is I am very logic based in all of my decision making. So when we think about the emotions of like, well, I want this new thing, like my practical brain can kick in pretty easily and talk myself out of it, and I can do that for any purchase. So not just something big like a kitchen, but even something as small as like buying a coffee on a daily basis. Even if I don't have coffee at home, which I haven't so far because we've moved here about a month ago and I just haven't gone out and bought a new bag of coffee yet, but I can just like convince myself that I'm good with water. And so having that like practical brain and having that voice in the back of your head that is basically just like devil's advocate constantly is a really powerful tool that I've kind of found to keep my spending somewhat in check on a regular basis.
Right. And yeah, you're right. It applies at all levels. You can do it for every single decision that you're making, right? You can evaluate opportunity costs and like be super logical and methodical about all the, all of the actions that you perform and all the things that you would have spent money on or saved money on, more importantly, right? Because that's a different... Right? Those are two different decisions that you're making, right? I can either like give this money away, or I can hold on to the money is one decision, or I can like invest it in somewhere that makes it harder to get to but is better for me long term. Kind of one of the biggest examples of what you're talking about and the most famous is when you're buying a house, and either a good realtor that you're talking to or maybe your family, they will immediately tell you that the common practice is to not get emotional about a home buying process, because as soon as you do, you become the weaker side of that equation, right? You're trying to negotiate with somebody. You lose all your buying power if you are like more emotionally invested in like getting this property. You're gonna end up paying way more for it, right? If you're willing to walk away. Car sales is another good one, right? You got to be willing to walk away from the deal. Otherwise, they're not gonna give you like as good of an offer as they would have given you.
Yeah, and so I think kind of going along with those purchases too, another emotion that's really kind of important to keep in check is jealousy or envy.
Envy.
Because I think a lot of times, especially in our age group, and most of our listeners, I actually saw some demographics recently, and we're mostly chatting to people in their 20s and 30s here on this podcast. And if you're older or younger, obviously everything still applies to you, but especially people in our age group, and then I think people maybe in their 40s, that's kind of the point in which people buy their first home and then kind of their second home, is in their 20s and 30s and then 40s. And it's really easy because you watch your peer group, and you say, oh, well, like so-and-so, oh my God, did you see their house? Like they got this and it's beautiful. Or
right, or your neighbors.
Right.
Especially. What did your neighbors do? Did they move somewhere else? Did they upgrade whatever, so-and-so? And their house is amazing now, and they decided it was a good decision, so I'm going to bandwagon on that, and it must be a good decision, right?
Right.
So I'm going to do this too. And then all of a sudden you have 3, 4, 5 neighbors all in the neighborhood that are all kind of just like dumping money to the same developer to go redo all their kitchens or whatever it is.
Right. And it's so easy to, or you see somebody buy their first house, and maybe you haven't bought one yet, and you see the part of town they buy in or the size house they get in, and you think, well, if so-and-so in my peer group can do this, then surely I can too. Mm-hmm. And I think what you kind of have to remember is a lot of people don't have a background in personal finance or making good financial decisions, so it might not have been a good idea for them to buy the house or car or home renovation that they did.
Right, because you don't know what the rest of their situation looks like, or maybe even you do, and they haven't been investing in the 401k ever in their entire life, right? So they just have like an extra pool of money that hits their checking account every month. And so they're just like, oh, I got all this money, it's burning a hole in my pocket, better go renovate my kitchen.
Yeah.
Or buy a new house, or, time to upgrade. And inflate my lifestyle, right, a little bit more, because that makes me more important, and therefore, they're really in trouble long term. So you shouldn't be emulating that behavior.
Yeah, and we actually, I met one of Brett's friend's parents for the first time a few years ago, and we were like at her gorgeous lake house, and I was kind of in one of those like shell-shocked things where I was like, oh my gosh, like, I don't even know how to act, because clearly this is somebody who's like super wealthy, and I'm going to need to like, be on my best behavior, and you're just like rubbing elbows with somebody who is clearly well off, or you think so in your mind. And immediately she just like made me feel super comfortable and was like, we're cooking dinner at home, and she started talking about how frugal she was, and I was like, oh my gosh, can we be best friends? Like, I know you're in your 60s, but I love you. And then she really kind of mentioned how like, she worked her butt off, and her entire life, her entire working career, her goal was to be able to afford that house. And so I think it goes both ways. Sometimes you don't understand people's financial situation, and they're getting themselves into all this debt. And other times you don't understand people's financial situation, and they've literally been saving for this item forever.
Right. And then, she just had a better financial background or backing, or had some examples younger in her life where, it made sense for her to like have that strong savings foundation.
Right.
And now people are making in like their late 20s, dual income, they can qualify, quote unquote, from any mortgage company to go buy that same house.
Right.
Which is nuts. Like, they could be her next door neighbors, and like, yeah, she worked her whole life to be able to like qualify and accurately afford that without ruining
debt.
Yeah, without going into debt, without ruining any of her other savings goals. And then you have people that are just starting from that position, and have like no savings whatsoever and are totally set up for failure, but they look the same from the outside, right?
Well, you have people you have young people doing that, but you also have people who are in retirement who did not save up for that specific goal, who just saved up one lump sum of money that they need to live off of for the rest of their life, and then they decide to go and spend half or all of it on a lake house, and now their savings is completely depleted.
Right.
So that's what I mean about, like, you don't know everyone's background, but what you do need to do is to kind of separate that and not worry about what everybody else is doing, and focus on your life, what makes you happy, and what are your priorities. So I think a super powerful thing to do to kind of get past the emotional side is to physically write down, these are my top 3 goals. And whatever that is, it could be, I want to be able to go and buy a latte every day. Because some people get more enjoyment out of the daily pleasures than like one big thing.
Mm-hmm. Or long term, yeah.
Yeah. For Brett and I, we get more pleasure out of the long-term things. So one of our goals would probably be to hit a, target level in our mutual fund savings account, because that provides us a big safety net for an emergency fund. It provides us the ability to save for bigger future long-term goals, such as, maybe a different home or auto purchase.
Right. And just by hitting those goals, we mentally understand and tie that to we now have opportunity.
Right.
So we're just dumping money into this account, trying to get it as high as we can. And then when we hit those goals, we're like, okay, now we can do like this or this or this. And these are all like really big opportunities that we can go after. And, the world's our oyster. Right?
Well, and we've kind of mentioned before with like some of our investing and our compound interest podcasts, we've talked about how any dollar that you invest today starts working for you tomorrow and keeps working for you forever. And that's something that we've really taken to heart where Brett and I have mentioned a lot on the podcast about how we love to travel. And we actually have not taken a big international trip for 2 years now, which I know like everyone's going to be like, oh, poor you. Like, but that's something that is important to us. And we do a lot of travel because we value it. But we've kind of put that back on the back burner to hit our savings goals. But that also means that in the future, because we took this money and we saved it now, in a few years, it's going to start kicking off dividends and investment returns for us. And then it's basically going to pay for an international trip for us in the future every single year, right? I mean, that's the payoff that you get from investing this money. So we're choosing delayed gratification in some of these areas. And by no means am I sitting here saying, like, poor us, like, pity us. Like, no, we are making this choice very intentionally. And we're still having a lot of fun in the meantime. Because we're not taking international trips, it's allowing us to prioritize being tourists in our own city a little bit more and going out and enjoying things here that maybe we wouldn't spend the money on otherwise. So it's all about compromise and finding that balance. So I guess to go back to my point here, it's good to write down your top 3 priorities because it keeps you on track. And then when somebody else that gets that new house or new car or even something smaller, maybe they get a new purse or a new pair of shoes, you can refer back to your list and say, is it on my list? No, it's not. Does it need to be on my list?
Right.
Do I need to reorder my list? Was I wrong?
Because you can change it, right? Maybe, or you didn't have complete information, right? And so, if suddenly you change a different, or you hit a different stage in your life and your priorities shift, and I mean, I know this has happened to us many times, right? We change we have this plan and then we ended up changing our plan a little bit to reprioritize some of these things, which is fine. But you got to take something off that list, right? So if you're going to bring something else onto it, then you need to say, this is more important than one of these 3 things, and then that's coming off, right?
Right.
You just don't want to do that with like a kind of a knee-jerk reaction of like, me getting a new car is more important than saving for my retirement and like dumping any money into my 401k, right? Like that to me does not seem like a good decision, but it is your goal, I suppose.
But furthermore, I also think it's a really bad idea to say, well, I want a new car. That's my priority number 1, and it needs to happen tomorrow. Or I want a new house and it needs to happen tomorrow. Like if you want a new house or a car, those are really big purchases and they shouldn't happen tomorrow. So what I think is, what you're going to really regret is if you're like, well, my number 1 priority is to buy a house. So I'm going to cash in all of my retirement savings. Like you're shooting yourself in the foot. So if that's your number 1 priority, don't think like, how do I make this happen as fast as humanly possible with the resources I have? It's really without disturbing anything else that I've saved or any of my past priorities, which was to build, my retirement savings to a certain level. How do I achieve this goal?
Right. And you should still follow a lot of the principles we talked about. Like you don't want to go into credit card debt to achieve that goal. You don't want to stop getting a match from your company at your 401k to achieve that goal, right? Some of the like core baseline things that if you did those things, it's super detrimental to you. But you do want to reprioritize where your savings are going, right?
Yeah. And so, a lot of times you can reconfigure your budget, figure out how to save a little bit more each month. And sometimes the answer that people don't want to hear, but the answer that's really important is that it just takes time.
Right. Because mentally, the hardest thing to gain that extra money from, right, is the expenses. It's easy to take it away from your savings because you control that money already, like 100%. You control where that savings money is going. You decide if it's going to go into this account or this account, but it's coming through you to get to your retirement or your long-term or mid-term investment, funds. The expenses stuff, other people are kind of taking that from you or manipulating you mentally to take it from you.
Right.
Right? So stopping that outflow of cash is your best source of coming up with that money to meet that new goal.
Right. And so I think another kind of interesting thing to talk about is the goals of other, and then figuring out what can I afford. And we've talked about this on some podcasts before, but sometimes it's not enough to have like $0 saved anywhere else and then save up, $1,000 to buy whatever thing you want. Typically, to really feel comfortable buying that and to really get like maximum joy is to not have your bank account fall back to zero after that purchase. So this is something that Brett and I can actually speak on a little bit with houses, because I think it's something that we've been pretty meticulous about doing. But when we bought our first house, it really was probably the tightest equity squeeze we've ever had, because it was our first home. We had to come up with a lot of initial money, all of that, obviously. But then when we bought our second house, it was a lot easier because we had all of the equity from the first house that we could roll right into that second house. And that's something we really did do. We were able to get 20% down because of that. And I think some people, when they get all that equity out, it's tempting to say, oh, well, I can just put 5% down and then look at all this money that I'd have to do renovations or buy new furniture or, redo X, Y, and Z. It's way more powerful to maintain that savings and then chip away slowly at everything on your to-do list.
Right. Or even, it can or can't be a good strategy to like roll all that equity back into the house, right? So if you have 50% down, maybe you don't want to put all 50% back into the house, right?
20%
keep it at 20%. That's usually the right choice, no matter how much equity you already had. And then, you're investing that other money and making that money making you more money. So if you delay your renovation project, instead of doing it on day one when you move in and you need that money in hand, if you delay that until next year, then you gained all that interest on that money. And what did you lose? You lost 1 year of having an older kitchen or bathroom, and now your kitchen or bathroom is going to be in style for 1 year longer, right? Or maybe you caught the new trend and now it's going to be more in style for like 15 years, right?
Right. If you're lucky.
If it lasts that long.
Yeah. So we've kind of talked about, that emotional side of things, about delayed gratification. And I think once you start doing some of these steps, it's baby steps, but you will find that like even the emotional side of savings compounds. And sometimes Brett and I even have to check ourselves, because we will save for a goal and then we like don't really want to just see that money go to, that account go to zero. So then we like wait a little bit longer.
Right.
So it's definitely finding that middle ground and finding that balance.
And it's just putting your own, your mentality with like bumpers around it, right? Or safeguards or whatever, right? For bumper bowling. You just want to prove to yourself that I can take money from one spot and translate it to another spot, and then it's at no loss to me, right? I'm not hurting myself long term. So a better example, it's not with houses and cars and bigger purchases. It's with smaller things, but things that you want to have, right? So if I want to give up, like if I'm spending like somewhere between $2 and $5 on lattes, maybe a couple times a week to 5 times a week, right? If I didn't do that for a year, I could buy like a pool, right? Or like an above ground pool, or like something else fun for my family, or something else that's really awesome and or entertaining for me to use or do. Or I could buy paddle boards or outdoor sporting equipment, or anything that's in like that like small to mid-tier price range. You can make like adequate expense changes on your day-to-day life, like bringing your lunch every day instead of going out to eat every day.
Right.
Turning those things, that turns into like a pretty decent amount of money very, very quickly if you wait like a year and change that behavior. Then you just have like all this like cool stuff that you can do. Or if you decide at the end of that year that you still don't want that, and that was just like a one-time kind of a fad, then great, you have a big pile of money that you can now either invest or put in a mutual fund, or turn that money into better longer-term money.
Right. So I think one of the key attitude adjustments to make, if you're just starting out with some of this, is to switch your attitude from like, this is impossible, I could never save this money, I have to have everything in my life that I currently have, to I can do this and I can figure this out. Because just in talking to different frugal people I know versus spendy people I know, that's the big thing I've noticed, is like just the willingness to problem solve and make a change. So like I've talked to, a family of 3 who spends $200 to $250 a month on groceries. And I've talked to a family of 3 who also believes that they could not spend less than $1,000 a month on groceries. Both people, in my opinion, eat healthy. They both eat good things for them. One is buying definitely more high-priced, heavily marketed items versus the other one who's just going down to like their local farmer's market and buying direct from farmers. So instead of like, buying the superfood that is ginger, they're just buying ginger.
Right.
And it's not marketed and branded in the same way. We've seen that, especially with like how meat can be branded in the grocery store versus like just buying meat from our farmer. It's like way cheaper, and like it just doesn't have all the buzzwords on the packaging because there isn't as much packaging.
Right, yeah, because, I mean, where we lived before, you could drive by, like, the pasture where the cow was and be like, that's where the cow, like, was walking around every day, and, like, now he's for sale.
Right.
At the farmer's market, like, I'm pretty confident in that quality of meat, right?
Right.
Versus, like, whatever super industrial farm that cow came, other competitive cows would have come from for much cheaper prices in like the big box stores.
Right.
Right. You don't want to drive by those places. They don't let you drive by those places.
Right.
They don't let you see those cows grazing around because they don't, right?
Which we don't need to go into a deep rabbit hole about meat here. But more so just kind of the importance of I can do it. And I think that'll get you really far in saving money. But even in terms of like, we had to swap out a bathroom sink recently, like the faucet. Yep. And instead of saying, oh, we can't do this, we need to hire it out, we just went into it with the mentality of, well, we can probably do this. And you load the sink up with some towels and a bucket so that if there's a leak, you can fix it. And it's fine, right? Like, we made it work.
Right. You try and get the wrench in there and you swear a bunch because it doesn't really want to fit. And eventually, after an hour, like, all is done, right? It's fine. And the new ones are super easy to install now. So people, old things are not always the best, to come full circle from the beginning of this podcast, I suppose.
That's
old fridge,
true.
Old appliances, fantastic. Old sink installations and whatever technology they were using at that time to make all my pipes rusty, bad.
Yeah. So kind of the last place that I wanted to go to on this journey is just really addressing people who don't even know what their financial picture looks like. And how do they even get started? And I think the key here is to put all of your feelings of maybe you're ashamed, maybe you're scared, maybe you don't even know where to start, set those aside, take a deep breath, and just like log into your bank accounts. And I say this from a place of like really understanding, because when I was in college, I was on a very, very fixed budget. Like I didn't have a lot of extra money to spare. I was paying for my groceries and everything, but I was like, my groceries at the time were about $100 to $150 a month. Like I just didn't have a lot of extra money. And sometimes it would be hard for me because I'd get caught up in the moment. I'd be with friends and they'd be like, let's just go out to dinner. And when you're with a group of like 5-10 people, you don't want to be the one person that's like, okay, have fun, everybody. Like, you all go to dinner and I'm just gonna not. And so I would go and I would do these things, but like at that point in my life, spending $20 randomly on a dinner, I mean, that was like 20% of my food budget for the month, Mm-hmm. And it makes a big difference. And there would be times where I would put it on my credit card and I would be so scared to log in and see what my credit card bill was, because I typically try to keep most of my monthly expenses right around $500 a month. And granted, that did not include my rent. My rent was separate, but that was like $250 a month. And that was like on auto pay for me. I was living, super cheaply. But everything else was right about 500. And like, I would be so scared if I logged in and saw that number at like 700, and I'd be like, how am I going to come up with this extra $200? And sometimes it was, I'm going to have to dip into my savings account. Sometimes it was, I'm going to have to go donate plasma. Sometimes it was, I'm going to go home to Lansing, where I grew up, for the weekend and see if anybody needs a babysitter or any odd jobs done around their house. Like, I'm just going to try to figure out how to come up with this money. And it's scary. And so I would say, once I took a step back and I was like, where am I going with this? Where do I have money coming in? What are my goals? And I actually kind of set those boundaries for myself. Then I had a plan. And having a plan feels really, really good when you're going from month to month, scared of logging into your credit card statement. Understanding like these are my goals. I want to have this savings cushion and I want to do these things. Then it made me stronger to say, okay, when people invite me out to dinner, I'm stronger. I can say no, and I can just say, but I do want to meet up with you after dinner. Like, where are you guys going to go after dinner? Are you going to go back to somebody's house? I'll just meet you there.
Because it's hard to, I mean, I did the same thing with just trying to save money, not for any particular purpose. It's a lot harder from a mental standpoint. Like, if I'm going to go out to, you know, with some coworkers after work or something, I don't really want to spend like $5 to $7 on a beer or two or something, right? I'd rather have the dollar than the beer. And so it's hard to like be in that situation of peer pressure and be like, oh no, you know, I'm just drinking water tonight. And they're like, oh, why? You know, why is that going to happen? Usually people aren't like that, but like the mental fear of like, I'm going to be singled out because like I'm not doing what everybody else is doing as part of the group, right? You think you're going to be, you know, singled out by the rest of the herd. And, you know, most people don't care. Or they're like, if you have a goal that you're saving for, be like, hey, no, you know, I'm not buying any beers tonight. I'm saving toward this thing. People are very understanding of that. It's a little bit harder to come up with an excuse when you're just like, oh no, I don't feel like spending it tonight. Then you're just gonna lie and be like, oh no, you know, I'm not drinking. You know, I'm hungover from yesterday, haha, right? Or come up with some other lame excuse. But
yeah, well, and I think you've had a pretty good reaction. I know I have had people in my life who don't always have the most understanding approach, and so even if I say, well, I'm saving for this, they're like, oh, but you can afford this, or oh, it's just $5 to $7 for this beer. And that's why, like, having something that you're really passionate about and just keeping that list, like, you know, sometimes I even used to write, like, sticky notes and put them up around my house, or I'd write a list of things. It really just helped keep me centered from day to day and be like, no, like, I know you think I can afford this, but you don't know the ins and outs of my budget.
Right.
So,
and people want you to bandwagon too, I suppose, right?
Absolutely.
Like that's why it's the initial
huge
ask.
Culture,
yeah.
Right? It's like, it's the whole norm of like, but we all go out and we all have a beer.
It makes them feel like they're justified in doing what they're doing if they can get other people around them to do it as well, right?
Absolutely.
Whether that's getting into trouble in high school or whether it's like getting into trouble as an adult, or, you know, people just want to feel like they are part of a group.
Yeah. And I think that's super common. I think even like back to your example, Brett, of like neighbors, right? It's like, oh, well, like so-and-so just installed a new deck, so we can install a new deck. It gives you that feeling of validation. But if you just, you know, you can also be the trendsetter of like, oh, we just resurfaced our deck. You know, we power washed it and restained it and it looks great. We did that at our first house, actually. And we had neighbors that were like, yeah, we were thinking about replacing our deck, but like yours turned out pretty good, so maybe we'll just do that. So like it goes both ways. Like you can be a really good influence on people or you can be a really bad influence on people. And I think knowing what you need to do, and if you're in credit card debt, you don't have to even feel bad about saying that you can't afford a beer because you really can't. Like you've been digging yourself into a hole every single month. And I know going out to happy hour is fun, but what I used to do when I was like in super debt payoff mode is I would go out to happy hour and I would get a water, or I would say, okay, I'm going to go to happy hour, you know, twice this week, but only one day am I going to get a beer. And the other day I'll just drink something else.
Right. I mean, you can just get like an aqua tonic, right? So you just have some water and some fizzy water that's poured into it and like a lime, and like every bartender will give you that for free.
Yeah.
And then you just walk around with that and it looks like you have a drink. I know I had another friend that used to walk around and he'd just like pick up like a empty beer bottle when it was that type of a bar, like off of a table somewhere, and just carry it around and be like, you know, it looked like he was like still hanging out drinking and stuff, but he was like, you know, keeping it on the down low.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you're in those high pressure situations, I mean, there's certainly ways to work around it. But I don't know. I found that if it's a close knit group that I'm familiar with, they're a little bit more understanding. If it's a bunch of strangers, or if it's a certain personality type, they're just people that are this way, right? They just want people to bandwagon and, you know, spend more money because they spend money.
Absolutely. And I think another thing is we've always kind of encouraged like, well, I've mentioned before that I'm part of different like book clubs, and joining cool meetups in your area or cool clubs in your area can be a really good way to like meet different people and maybe meet like-minded people. But going to those meetings can be expensive because typically they're at a restaurant, especially the first few. If you're just getting to know people, nobody's really comfortable having them at their house. And so in those situations, I typically just budget accordingly. Like I know I'm going to go to one book club this month, so I'll just like tuck aside $20 for it. Or if it's a month that we're really trying to not spend quite as much money. If I go to a restaurant, I feel like I have to get something and, you know, order something and tip. So if I don't want to get a meal, then maybe I'll just get like a coffee there and say like, you know, I already ate or you know, I'm going to lunch after this, so I'm just going to have a coffee here. And there's like no problem doing that. So you can get a coffee for a couple bucks and you can just, when I do that, I still leave the waiter like a $2 to $3 tip, which I know percentage-wise is like blowing it out of the water. But that way, that's what they would have gotten if I ordered a meal. So I'm still giving them the same rate they would have gotten, but I'm out of there for $5 instead of $20. And so that just bought me going to like 4, you know, book clubs or whatever instead of just 1.
Right. And some other tricks you can do too are just challenge yourself in different ways. Yeah, you can have plans and goals, and that's probably the best way. But if you're doing like a competition, like we've talked many times before that we do like no spend Septembers, or we'll be saving for a certain thing. So like we try and like, you know, make it more of a game. If you have a spouse with you or a partner or a boyfriend, girlfriend, and somebody that you're, you know, can talk openly about your finances with, you can sit down with them and say like, we're going to have a competition to see who can not spend as much money this month, right? On like just going out to do stuff, kind of a deal. And so, yeah, you just come up with creative scenarios when you're in that mentality, because your brain's just like trying to solve these problems all the time, because you have a dedicated competitive goal, and you have a better excuse too, because you're like, oh no, now I have a story, right? No, you know, me and my boyfriend are like not, you know, we're having a competition to see who can spend the least amount of money this month, right? So you time gate it. It's a short-term thing. Then people are way more understanding. You have a great excuse, and you're saving money at the same time, right? And your spouse is saving money at the same time.
Yeah, and I think another key, especially if you're kind of new to all of this and you don't really know how to get started, is just start small. So set a goal of like, you don't even have to have a goal of saving money this month. You could simply have a goal of like, who can spend less money going out to eat this month, or who can save the most money on groceries by like clipping coupons or whatever, and then you can kind of flip that to like, okay, you know, who can save the most just in general this month, but you don't even have to be on the same playing field as somebody to kind of play these games. So when Brett and I started dating, I was in college, I was broke as a joke, and he was already out of college working like a full-time job. So just naturally, when somebody's in college working very part-time versus somebody working full-time, he just made more money than me. And so instead of like saying like who can save the most amount of dollars or anything like that, we would literally just do like who can spend less. And then I was obviously at a clear advantage, which was, you know, it just made it fun. And then we would kind of set individual goals, but we would hold each other accountable. So we were pretty open with our finances from pretty early on in the relationship, just because we kind of had to be, since I was like pretty broke, and I just had to like be open with him of like, I can't, you know, he lived in Chicago at the time, and I was like, I can't drive here every other weekend and spend a ton of money going out to eat. So just naturally we would come up here and we would go grocery shopping together and do those sorts of things. But, you know, we were pretty open about like, I would say, you know, my goal is to just like not get into any more debt my senior year of college, which I wasn't even trying to save any money. It was just like, don't go backwards, right? And you had a goal of like saving your first emergency fund. So obviously you were trying to go forward. I wasn't trying to go back. I was just trying to stay where I was. But we were both able to check in with each other and say like, how's it going? You know, how's saving money going, or how's not spending money going? And having that accountability person, especially early on in my journey, was super nice for me.
Right, because you're basically treating each other as like a mentor in that kind of relationship, because you have somebody to play off of, somebody that's not going to like judge you about doing this activity. Everybody's kind of in it together, right? We're bandwagoning back in the right direction, right? So right. I'm going to be saving a bunch of money. You should save a bunch of money too, and we'll all be saving money together, and then we're all better off for it at the end of the day. And you can tighten these knobs as much as you want, right? Because like when you're talking about these strategies and these games and stuff like that early on, and looking from it from before you have started it, you know, it's pretty intimidating. And you can say like, well, this is gonna ruin my life, right? Like I'm not gonna have any more friends. I can't be social anymore, because like saving money equates to like not going out and like not having those interactions anymore. But you don't need to do that. It doesn't need to be that way. And try this stuff for like a month or a couple weeks and just see how it's impacting you. and then make adjustments. Because if you and your spouse are like having a competition to save money, and that person like never leaves the house ever, they stop driving, they only eat the food out of the pantry that's already there, and they stop grocery shopping.
I feel judged.
Yeah, sound familiar, Angela, for the last month? You right, if that is detrimental to your lifestyle and you look back and you're like, yeah, this was a pretty miserable time, then adjust for that. Right? You don't have to go all the way back to where you were before, but what were the things that you were living without during that time that are great? Like you don't need to have those things. You just realized I was just spending money on this stuff and it wasn't adding any real value to me. I was just doing it because it was a habit or a behavior. And right, so you end up with some wins out of that, but then you go back to like a more regular schedule.
Absolutely. And one area I can even think on that recently is we've been just trying to get our groceries into a reasonable price as we settle into living into Chicago again. And there's a lot of grocery stores right around us, naturally, some closer than others. And the one that's closest to us just seems to have a little bit of a premium for everything. And so we got kind of like reintroduced to Trader Joe. And I remembered like how much I liked that store. And there's some really good deals on some stuff there. And then there's some stuff that I'm like, not the best deal. But then I was also, we were actually buying food for our dog. We've talked about how we make her homemade food. And we were trying to find the best deal on chicken. And I've never been a big Aldi shopper. It's never been convenient for us. It's never been close to us. And it's never, like, we've always had cheap options anyways. And I have been shopping at Aldi lately, and I'm like, this is actually a really great store that has really good prices. So sometimes just by challenging yourself to like, okay, this month I'm going to only spend X number of dollars on groceries, you have to get creative. And sometimes it leads you to finding new kind of staples in your life.
Right. Yeah, and that's really easy to see when you're buying 25 pounds of chicken at one time. Yeah.
Yeah.
The numbers, getting 25 cents off is a big money saver.
But I will say that chicken, when it is on sale, for all of my friends here in the Midwest, we have Meijer, which is just fantastic. But when it's on sale at Meijer or Aldi, is far cheaper. Even when it's not on sale at Meijer or Aldi, it's still far cheaper than Costco. Is what we found out. Because we were like, we're going to have to get a Costco membership and we're going to have to pay for it. We're going to have to get our chicken there. And then I found Aldi and I was like, hold up. Aldi saves the day. So Thank you, Aldi. And thank you, Trader Joe's, for giving me reasonably priced groceries in a big city. I actually really do appreciate that because that's super important. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, we couldn't get it all from the farmer's market, right?
No, they didn't. They don't really have a ton of chicken here. So.
No. Yeah.
Okay, well, I think that about wraps up this podcast. Is there anything you want to leave our listeners with, Brett?
Yeah, tell Angela we don't want any more trivia questions.
All right. And I will leave our listeners with a challenge. So if you've been kind of stuck in a rut with your groceries, since that's something Brett and I have focused on recently, I challenge you to check out a new store in your area that you've never been to, because even when in the past 2 cities we've lived to, there were tons of grocery stores and, we only went to a small handful of them. Check one of them out. See, is there something that I'm missing? Is there something better that I've never been to? And then if there is, let me know what that store is, because I'd be very curious to know if we have it by us and I'm missing out on something great as well.
Yeah, some of the best things that we can find here are the local markets that don't advertise and don't market, and they're not big names.
Devon Market up on Devon Street. I see you, and you have really good pork prices, so thank you.
Yeah, great store. A lot of good people that work there, good quality stuff. So they just have to be better to keep existing because they're such small places. So.
Yeah, shop local. Maybe that's another challenge that I give you is check out one of your local businesses. Because I've been, we've been shopping a little more locally again. People are just so friendly. So we had in the move, we had our bikes that have the quick connect front tire that bolt fell off. We went to the bike shop here and the guy just took them off bikes on the floor to give to us.
Yeah, super nice guy.
Super sweet.
Just came up with a solution, didn't even question it, and was just like, oh, here you go. Not even something they sold. He had to key it into the inventory while we were checking out. So
and gave us awesome bare bottom price for it. So.
Yeah, awesome.
So shop local, check out a new grocery store, and let me know if any of that provides any interesting feedback to you. I'd love to hear it.
All right, I'm cutting you off, Ange, before you start dishing out any more challenges.
All right, thanks. Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of Money in the Bank. Make sure to subscribe to us on the iTunes or Stitcher app so that you get weekly alerts every time we post a podcast. Or if you want, you can visit my website, moneyinthebankpodcast.com. And if you want to reach out with any questions or further comments, please email me at Angie@moneyinthebankpodcast.com. I look forward to hearing from you.
Money in the bank.